Ashford Hollow was the kind of town you only saw in postcards, small, wooded, and far enough from the city to feel like its own little world. Nestled in upstate New York, its charm didn't come from luxury or fame, but from routine, from the way its people loved their traditions, from the quiet comfort that came with everyone knowing your name. And nothing brought the town together more than the 4th of July. Every year, like clockwork, the town transformed. Flags lined every porch. Red, white, and blue streamers hung from telephone poles. The scent of charcoal grills drifted from backyard to backyard, and old country music spilled from open windows as families prepared for the big celebration. The focal point of the holiday was always the lake. Mirror Lake, they called it, though no one remembered how the name came to be. By midday on July 4th, its grassy banks were packed with lawn chairs, picnic blankets, and coolers filled with soda, beer, and watermelons. Children ran barefoot across the lawn, chasing each other with sparklers and sticky fingers, while the older folks played cards under tents and recalled stories from past celebrations. For the townspeople, it wasn't just about America's independence. It was about the community, about togetherness, about laughter that echoed off the water, about shared memories passed from one generation to the next. Vendors from nearby towns set up food stalls along the outer edge of the lake, selling hot dogs, cotton candy, fried dough, and lemonade so sugary it made your teeth ache. Local bands played on a makeshift stage built each year from old pallets and plywood, and their music mixed with the sounds of children squealing, fireworks testing in the distance, and the occasional barking dog. The anticipation built slowly throughout the day. Everyone waited for nightfall, when the real magic would begin. By late afternoon, the sun hung heavy in the sky, casting golden rays through the canopy of pines that bordered the lake. Families began to settle into their favorite viewing spots. Ellie Palmer, a reserved 17-year-old girl with dark hair and watchful eyes, sat beside her mother, who was busy chatting with other parents from the neighborhood. Ellie wasn't much for loud events, but she came along anyway. Her mum had insisted. This would be their first 4th of July without Ellie's father, who passed away the previous autumn. He used to love this day. He'd grill burgers with too much pepper, sing along to every patriotic song, and pretend not to cry during the national anthem. Around them, the crowd thickened. Teenagers tossed footballs while balancing soda cans, elderly couples smiled beneath sun hats, and toddlers tugged impatiently at their parents' sleeves. Everyone had something to look forward to, and everyone knew the scheduled parade at 5, community dinner at 6:30, and the big fireworks show at 9:15 sharp. A timer was set off near the stage as the MC reminded everyone how lucky they were to be part of such a wonderful tradition. The lake, still as glass, reflected the clear blue sky and every flag fluttering beside it. The air was thick with heat and the scent of roasted meat and bug spray. As the sun dipped lower, the sky began to dim and people settled deeper into their seats. Children clutched glow sticks, their eyes wide with excitement. Somewhere, a radio crackled with patriotic tunes, and the gentle hum of voices turned into soft murmurs as people prepared themselves for the highlight of the night. All eyes would soon be on the sky, waiting for that first burst of light, that first boom that always made the lake jump. Ellie Palmer had never been one for crowds. Even before her father passed, she found large gatherings overwhelming, the constant noise, the closeness of so many bodies pressing in on her. She preferred quiet places where she could breathe, where the world didn't seem so loud. As the sun finally dipped below the treetops and the first few stars began to poke through the darkening sky, the crowd around Mirror Lake grew louder, more energetic. Children darted between blankets, waving glow sticks and shrieking with excitement. People were laughing, shouting, snapping photos, counting down the minutes until the fireworks would begin. Ellie, perched quietly beside her mother, felt herself pulling away from the noise. The laughter felt distant, the lights too bright. She glanced at her mother, who was now chatting animatedly with a group of neighbors, and then at the edge of the woods where the old trail began, the one that curved behind the lake and disappeared into the trees. It was a familiar path, one she and her father used to take during fishing trips when she was younger. It led to a quieter part of the water, a place where the fireworks could still be seen, but the crowd's roar was replaced by the gentle hush of the forest. Without saying a word, Ellie stood and slipped away from the blanket. No one noticed. Everyone was too wrapped up in the festivities. She moved quickly, dodging between folding chairs and stepping over cooler lids, until the soft grass gave way to the uneven dirt trail. The deeper she walked into the woods, the quieter the world became. The sounds of laughter and music faded, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. The sky above was still streaked with faint purples and pinks, and every few seconds a burst of light would illuminate the tops of the trees as test. Fireworks shot up in preparation. As Ellie rounded a bend in the trail, the trees began to thin, just slightly, offering a clearer view of the lake through the branches. She paused, taking in the serene reflection of the sky on the still water, the distant silhouettes of people lined up like shadow puppets on the shoreline. The first real firework exploded in the distance, painting the sky in red and gold. She watched it bloom and fade before taking another step forward. Then that's when she saw him. At first, she thought it was someone from town, a man standing ahead, just off the trail, facing the lake. His posture was ordernaturally stiff. He didn't react to the firework, didn't move at all. His clothing caught her eye. It wasn't something anyone in town would wear, not on the 4th of July, not ever. He wore a dark, frayed military coat that looked like it had come straight out of a history book. The buttons were tarnished, and the fabric looked old, faded, stained with what might have been dirt or something. Darker, his boots were caked with mud, and he wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face. Ellie stood still, uncertain. Something about him didn't feel right. The forest around her suddenly felt heavier, quieter than before. A firework flashed, again bathing the trees in light, and, in that brief second, she saw the man's face. It wasn't just pale, it was grey, lifeless, his skin pulled tight across hollow cheeks. His mouth hung slightly open, and his eyes sunken and dull-stared straight ahead. Unblinking, she ducked behind a tree, heart pounding, afraid to make a sound. Peeking out, she saw the figure slowly turn its head, not in a natural way, not like a person, but in a jerky, mechanical twist, like something being controlled. The man didn't seem to see her. He didn't move toward her. He simply began walking again, slowly, one heavy foot in front of the other, making his way toward the lake. Ellie remained frozen behind the tree, barely breathing, her fingers gripping the bark so tightly that splinters dug into her skin. The man in the military uniform had disappeared from view, swallowed by the trees and shadows as he made his way toward the lake. She could still hear faint bursts of fireworks in the distance, but even those seemed dulled now, as if muffled by something heavier than distance. The forest around her was no longer just quiet, it was unnaturally still. The Crickets had stopped chirping. The breeze had vanished. Every leaf, every branch, felt suspended in the kind of silence that presses against your ears. She took a cautious step forward, trying to see where the man had gone. But before she could reach the edge of the trail, something moved in the opposite direction. From deeper in the woods, just beyond where the trees thickened, came a flicker of motion, slow, dragging. Ellie stepped back instinctively, her eyes scanning the shadows until they locked onto another figure. This one was different. A woman, walking in the same stiff, unnatural way as the man, her head tilted at an odd angle. Her white summer dress was torn and stained, and her feet were bare and blackened as if she'd walked through ash. Ellie's gaze was drawn to her chest there, a gaping wound, burned and jagged, as if something had exploded from the inside out. And still, the woman walked forward, arms slightly out, face emotionless, her hair hanging in limp strands around her hollow expression. Ellie backed away, breath caught in her throat. Another firework burst overhead, lighting up the forest for a brief second, and in that instant, she saw even more figures emerging from between the trees. They came slowly, methodically, dressed in various time-worn clothes, some in military garb from different eras, others in tattered civilian clothes. All of them were grotesquely damaged. Burn marks, missing limbs, shattered skulls, blackened eye sockets. Some dragged rifles or bayonets. Others simply limped forward with twitching fingers and mouths agape. They weren't alive, that much was clear, but they weren't entirely dead either. Something in the way they moved, the purpose in their steps, suggested intent, a mission. They didn't look at each other. They didn't speak. They simply moved forward in unison, a slow and deliberate migration toward the sounds of joy and celebration echoing from the lake. Ellie ducked low, crawling behind the underbrush, heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her ears. She had no idea what she was seeing. It didn't make sense. She tried to convince herself it was some twisted, local performance, some elaborate, horrifying prank, but deep down she knew better. There was no stage, no audience, no safety lines or camera crews. These things weren't here to entertain. They were rising from someplace dark, some unseen corner of time, drawn toward the living. The path she had followed was now crawling with them figures with shattered bones, scorched skin, and faces stuck in expressions of rage, sorrow, and emptiness. The closer they came to the edge of the woods, the faster they seemed to move, as if sensing how close they were to their destination. Ellie pressed her back against the tree, trying to shrink herself, to vanish into the forest. A child's figure limped past her, dragging a toy drum with one arm hanging loose at the elbow, its mouth whispering a tune too soft to make out. Another figure had no face at all, just burned flesh where features should be, and yet it still walked, steady and unrelenting. She dared not scream, dared not move. The air around her was thick with the scent of old gunpowder, damp soil, and something else, something rancid and metallic. Her ears rang with the distant echoes of war cries that didn't belong to this era. The forest had become a passage, a bridge between then and now, and through it came the forgotten dead. When Ellie finally reached the clearing near the lake again, her legs were trembling and her breath came in shallow gasps. She burst out of the woods like something chased, expecting the safety of crowds, the comfort of normalcy. But what she saw stopped her dead in her tracks. The celebration had not continued. In fact, it hadn't moved at all. The entire crowd stood still, hundreds of people, frozen in place as if time had paused mid-moment. Children stood holding glow sticks mid-swing. Adults sat in lawn chairs with their faces turned skyward. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the entire town had fallen under a spell. The fireworks had stopped entirely. No more bursts of color. No echoing booms across the water. The sky was now dark and quiet, stars flickering faintly overhead as if unsure whether they should shine. Ellie stepped cautiously toward the crowd, scanning for any sign of life, any flicker of normalcy. But everyone's eyes were fixed on the sky wide open, glassy, unblinking. It didn't feel like they were watching something. It felt like they were being watched. She walked past a young boy who was standing with a half-eaten popsicle in one hand. His lips parted slightly in awe or confusion. His shirt was soaked with melted sugar, but he didn't seem to notice. Next to him stood an elderly woman in a floral dress, her mouth moving as if she were whispering something to herself, but no sound came out. A group of teenagers near the dock were locked in the same position, heads tilted back, arms limp by their sides. Ellie reached her mother's blanket. Her heart surged at the sight of her. She was sitting just as Ellie had left her, hands folded neatly in her lap, face upturned. Ellie dropped to her knees beside her and shook her shoulder gently. "Mum," she whispered. "Mum, we have to go." But her mother didn't flinch, didn't blink. She was breathing, Ellie could tell, but something about her was wrong. She looked peaceful, but vacant, as though some part of her had been switched off. Ellie reached out and took her mother's hand, holding it tightly. It was warm but lifeless. She looked around again, hoping, praying for someone, anyone, to break free of whatever this was. But the crowd remained frozen, like statues caught mid-movement. It was only then she realized how quiet it had truly become. Not just from the people, but from the world. No wind, no insects, no water lapping against the shore. It was an eerie vacuum of silence. And then, from the woods behind her, she heard them. The sound of leaves crunching, the dragging of feet, the low, wet shuffle of things moving through underbrush. Ellie turned just in time to see the figures emerging from the tree line, more of them now, dozens. They poured out in slow waves, their pale, distorted faces catching the faint glow of the remaining lanterns and streetlights. Some wore old uniforms, their coats torn and frayed. Others looked like townsfolk from a different century, their clothing outdated and rotted. Many bore the marks of death burns, open wounds, twisted limbs, hollowed eyes. But what chilled Ellie to the bone was that no one reacted. No one screamed. No one ran. The townspeople continued to stand there, unmoving. Their faces turned upward while the dead approached. Ellie backed away, dragging her feet through the grass, eyes darting wildly from one side of the lake to the other. She could see the figures circling the crowd now, surrounding them slowly like predators waiting for a signal. Some of them had stopped just a few feet away, staring at individuals with strange intensity, as if recognizing them. Ellie's breath hitched as she watched the dead draw closer to the living, and still no one moved. The figures from the forest didn't rush. They didn't groan like the zombies in movies. Instead, they moved with eerie calm, like they already knew what was going to happen. Their faces, though twisted and wounded, were focused, locked onto specific people in the crowd. And that's when Ellie noticed something that made her knees nearly give out. Some of the frozen townspeople began to whisper, softly at first, lips barely moving. Names she didn't recognize. Names they spoke like prayers or memories. Ellie's mother, who hadn't spoken a word since she returned, suddenly murmured, "Thomas." Her voice was fragile, filled with something between awe and grief. One by one, others started to whisper to a man near the edge of the dock, called out, "Mary." A little girl clutched her stuffed animal and whimpered, "Uncle Jake." Ellie turned in circles, watching the crowd come alive again, but not in a way that brought relief. They weren't waking up, they were responding to the figures approaching them. And those figures, with their broken bodies and ghostly silence, began to stretch out their arms. Some of the townspeople took hesitant steps forward, like they were seeing long-lost family members. They didn't see the burns, the holes, the missing pieces. They didn't see what Ellie saw. Their faces were soft with recognition, with longing. They were smiling. A man embraced a figure in a Revolutionary War uniform, sobbing into a bloody coat like he had waited his whole life for this moment. A child reached up toward a ghostly woman with one arm missing and a collapsed skull, and the woman knelt to pull the girl into her arms. Ellie backed away, horrified. She realized they weren't being attacked, they were being welcomed, or maybe The dead didn't speak, but somehow they were calling out to the living, drawing them in like moths to a flame. The figures didn't need to run, they didn't need to chase. They knew the names, they wore the faces. Faces that meant something to the people of Ashford Hollow. Faces from the past, faces believed to be gone forever. Some of the people dropped to their knees in joy, others wept as they followed the dead toward the woods. Ellie watched as whole families walked off the lawn and into the forest, arms entwined with their ghostly counterparts. They moved with a sense of purpose, as if stepping into a memory instead of a nightmare. The edge of the forest seemed to shimmer, the trees flickering between light and shadow like a veil had been lifted. The deeper the people walked into the woods, the more they faded from view, not just in distance, but in form. Their bodies began to flicker like light through fog, and then disappear completely. Ellie wanted to scream, to stop them, but no one heard her. She lunged for her mother again, grabbing her hand tightly, but her mother didn't look at her. Her eyes were locked on something else, something Ellie couldn't see. A voice whispered from the trees. A man's voice. "Com. Familia." It said her mother's name the way her father used to say it. Her mother let go of Ellie's hand. Ellie tried to pull her back, but her mother was already walking, her steps slow but certain. The moment she reached the first line of trees, she vanished into the dark like smoke. All around her, the rest of the town was doing the same. The morning light crept slowly over Ashford Hollow, filtering through the trees and casting long shadows over the empty fields. The lake was still again, but not in the festive, peaceful way it had been the day before. The chairs were abandoned, many tipped over or left in disarray, coolers wide open, their contents spoiled and scattered. Paper plates and crumpled flags drifted across the grass in the soft breeze, but there were no people. Not a single sound of laughter or footsteps, no conversations, no remnants of celebration, just silence. Ellie stood near the edge of the woods, her clothes torn, her face pale, and her eyes bloodshot from crying. Her legs ached, her throat was raw. The scratches on her arms were crusted with dry blood, and her shoes were missing, lost somewhere during her desperate run for help. She had made it to the highway, barefoot and stumbling, flagged down a passing trucker who had nearly slammed the brakes when he saw the wild look in her eyes. He had called the police, and Ellie could barely speak as they placed a blanket around her shoulders and loaded her into the back of an ambulance. But now, standing there once more, escorted by a team of officers and rescue workers, Ellie could hardly believe what she was seeing. or rather, not seeing. The entire town, everyone who had been there the night before, was gone. Not just vanished, but erased. There were no bodies, no signs of violence or struggle, no footprints leading into the woods, no tire tracks. Just the leftovers of a celebration that had never properly ended. The officers were baffled. They searched every inch of the surrounding forest, combed through back roads and nearby houses. Drones flew overhead. Bloodhounds sniffed for scent. Trails, but nothing turned up. Not one person, not one clue. It was as if the entire population of Ashford Hollow had evaporated into the trees. Ellie told them everything. She told them about the soldier she saw, the ghostly figures, the whispers, the people walking willingly into the forest. But the more she spoke, the more the officers exchanged uncertain glances. They wrote it off as trauma, shock, hallucinations brought on by grief and fear. A psychologist came to visit her at the hospital, gently asking about her history, trying to understand her delusions. But Ellie never changed her story. Not once. She described each face, each detail, each voice. She remembered how her mother said Thomas before she let go of her hand. She remembered how the dead didn't attack but waited, how they didn't chase but called. News stations picked up the story briefly. Town disappears after 4th of July celebration. Conspiracy theorists speculated about government experiments, secret radiation zones, alien abductions. Most people dismissed it as a hoax or a misunderstood natural disaster. A few thought maybe the lake had poisoned the water supply and caused mass hysteria. But the search ended after 2 weeks. The police released a vague statement about unresolved missing persons and quietly shut the case. No answers, no arrests, no closure. Ellie never returned to Ashford Hollow. She moved far away to a city where the trees didn't stretch high enough to block the sky, and the silence never lasted long enough to become frightening. Every year, when the 4th of July came around, she locked her doors, shut her windows, and kept every light in her apartment turned off. She didn't watch fireworks. She didn't wear red, white, or blue. She stayed still, curled in bed, listening for footsteps that never came. But sometimes, just after midnight, she would see something out of the corner of her aja, flicker of motion near the trees across the street. A figure in an old uniform, standing, watching, waiting.